a lot of different perspectives, right? And in this case, you described to us a very important interpretation of this data, which is people say it's so impossible, but in fact you're showing that it's
Yeah, exactly.
not.
You do something concrete with that.
Yeah, yeah.
So you take because first time when I learned it for the first time, I take these pages and I have this endless sort of stream of note heads without any sort of relevance musical, and I start working through that. And it took years until I realized that actually, it's easy. Okay, it's not easy, but
Right.
it's not this sort of monstrous experience that people usually like to boast and claim, you know. Okay, with Herma, for example, this is one of Xenakis' sketches for the structure, the algebraic structure of the piece. With Herma, we have a much more primitive. This is from 2014. That was the first patch Frédéric Bevilacqua developed for me. And this is the very last page of Herma. We need some more sound, probably. Okay. So you see, that's that's a typical situation. That's what Xenakis asks to be 20 sounds per second. It's the sort of explosion, the final explosion of the key. And now we are analyzing those things again, very carefully, sort of comparing the multimodal data with my annotations and using Xenakis' technique of composing, so these densities, in order to create a measure of movement density in correspondence to Xenakis' measure of pitch density. So that could give us a measure of complexity if we can correlate the two for real experiments we are now conducted in technology enhanced learning.
Did you graph this?
The measure of movement density?
A and B, yeah. Did you?
That's work in progress.
Oh, okay.
We haven't done it yet. But it will be really interesting. And we need that because we need an index to be able to tell us, that piece has this sort of relation between this density and that density, right? And that would give us really fun results. We're getting there. I'm at the late stages of that, and it will be ready soon.
Is it worthwhile to have a kind of a linear motion rather than a kind of a jumping motion between the hand displacements?
How do you mean where?
So if you're doing, for instance, scales, right? That's a different kind of motion.
Exactly. That was exactly the case in what I showed before with Xenakis.
But
it's the difference. It's the difference between this material and this material.
But the displacement notation right now are straight lines. Is it possible to have them color-coded or something?
To create, yeah, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. It's very possible to. I mean, here I've shown already many different representations. For example, here if you have these lines, this linear material, you can have it in the form of chords or in the form of fingers.
I was just referring to the one graph with the multimodal graph with 6.
The signals, you mean?
Yeah.
The signals is, I don't think the signals is something that the performer could use in any case.
Right.
It's very useful for analyzing and checking those displacements, basically, and finding the profile, but it's and quantifying that, because of course you have the data, but you don't use it as a performer back into the practice, I would say, in its pure form, representationally speaking. Right. But of course you can do all sorts of things even with this sort of data. Okay, just to show, I don't know how much time we still have. I want to show you another video from our work with Stella Paschalidou, the gorilla one. So that's the setting we had at Aristotle University, late July 2020. And you see it was a very, very hard setup with also just mounting the cameras on the piano and me carrying these very, very intrusive gloves. But what we got out of that was the use of MAIO, so EMG data for muscular contraction, and that was quite interesting. So here you can see a graph of how they correlate to acceleration data.
What are we looking at?
On the right, it's the right and left hands,
Right.
and you can see the force, the muscular force being exerted here over time. It's
So higher, as it goes higher, that means more force.
yeah, exactly here.
Right.
And so that's also work in progress, trying to correlate this sort of muscular data with Xenakis, and we found what I'm gonna show right now. So that's a very, very short example. I'll play it again after, but now just to show you that we have this plotting of my force over time, showing, color coding the maximum force being exerted and the minimum, the maximum with red, the minimum with blue in this color range. And you can see, is there much red in this situation? No, actually it's, most is in the lower side of the spectrum. And I'm playing Evriali, Xenakis. So we have found, we start finding very important features, like when we find that when I'm sort of playing the most difficult passages in Evriali, the muscular involvement is not as extreme as when I'm trying to play very, very silent things, and then I get more contracted.
Is here it was measuring?
It's here. Yeah.
Is force related to tension, no?
Yeah, it's muscular tension. It's electromyography, basically. So that's really exciting findings there. That
You have tried several times the same part in different conditions, I guess.
no, we have several measurements, but that by default are in different conditions. But we don't control the conditions so as to show that. But what do you mean conditions in this case?
Yeah, I mean the tension. I mean like the see if there is external conditions or internal to you to your body.
Like playing loud or soft, or what do you mean?
Yeah, I mean being more tired or
No, we haven't tried that. What would be useful to try would be different subjects, obviously. So now we're working with me, but obviously we want to work with like another two pianists that play the same, and we can tell if there are similarities in these patterns of muscular activation, right?
Right. Hard to make sure that all the parameters will be equal, will be the same.
Exactly. That's why it has to be very ecologically controlled, the sort of setting for conducting such an experiment.
And how would you measure the baseline for each performer's muscular tension?
There is an initial baseline which is like exerting the maximum muscular force.
And the lightest. as
Yeah.
well.
And
You get a
defining the
range.
range. Yeah. All that is implemented again in Maximus P. Here is the system I was carrying, which was a bit of an overkill. No, that
the degree of invasiveness there.
yeah, exactly. That was trying to decide on what is feasible and what is not. Obviously, that's not what we ended up
But
with.
also, I mean, if you have all these devices on your hands and you are measuring things that you will do after without, I mean, it's not.
Yeah, that's a very good question. that's a very good question. Eventually, we ended up with a system which is quasi-transparent. So it's
No, because the problem of video captation is that it's a lot of latency. I mean, there is for the fast movements, the latency is impossible to compare. I mean, it's so big related to an accelerometer, and it's not invasive.
yeah, but that's
but
already
it's
that's
accurate.
that's already resolved in this sort of work of aligning data and the patches that we are creating in order to synchronize the video and acceleration streams. So that's already taken into account before.
So they have to kind of calibrate that already.
Yeah, but he says resolve.
Yeah, it's resolved in certain cases. Like in the video I showed you with the Kinect, it's not the case everywhere. I mean, there are obviously cases whereby we're still struggling with specifics, but there are, yeah.
Because you have to, a little bit of guesswork is going to be part of that.
Yeah, there is guesswork, patchwork, very pragmatic considerations that make things work without necessarily having theorized about them. You know, it's a very practical activity.
Sorry.
Yeah, please.
You have tested that with Xenakis Centenary.
No, it's with lots of repertoire. I'm just focusing. I'll show a small example with other things like Fernihoe, for example. Okay, here I have some specifics about the system we are using for technology enhanced learning, but just to show you some representations. I'm not sure how much time we still have.
Before we were using Monday.com, our team was drowning in work.
Sorry about that.
Our days used to split between work.
How long would you like to go?
I'm good, but it
Okay. So, how long?
so this is a tablature I made for I call it a tablature for Brian Fernihoe. It's lemma icon epigram. It's learning lemma icon epigram, and I have combined this MaxMSP system with a system which is made for augmented interactive scores called InScore. It's created at Gram in Lyon, and so you can program basically images, signals, videos, symbolic notation, everything. So you see here the InScore. You have a signal, it's a bit hidden, of my okay, so this is me sight reading lemma icon epigram, the first page, and having analyzed the movement here with this basic envelope I showed before, so the attacks and the displacements, basically. Here is the real score, which we'll see later. And here was a second video playing inside, I don't know if you noticed, whereby there was a scrolling score showing again the displacements, like 1, 2, 3, 4. You know, it's like conducting gestures almost to play. And how we come up with this sort of thing? Again, we have an algorithm for reducing the score. I should have somewhere the original score. I'll show you the original score very shortly, but here is, so we have the MIDI data transcribed into this space-time representation. This is automatic with tools developed by the InScore developers. And then we're sort of removing nodes to show different embodied layers. So in the first case, we have the complete thing, the complete MIDI file, so to speak. The red nodes are always the 5 fingers, the 5th fingers. The blue nodes are the thumbs. And you see, we leave only the 5th and the thumb, so we define the grasps. And then we also remove some of those intermediate nodes to define only their movements. And we end up with a skeleton of the whole thing. It's Schenkerian almost, yes. Other people have said that, but it's interesting because then you do have the original score by Fernihoe, and you have this basic gestural pattern which is chunked into 6 things, and so you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to play the lemma icon epigram. So it's a very interesting, I think, device, because way of approaching, because you oversimplify this very complex thing, you create this ground of gesture, and then you go back and you start adding detail.
In the Fernihoe interpretation, which is, there is so much information, so you must choose and navigate.
Yeah, but here I'm not exactly choosing,
Yeah,
because
but
here I'm dealing.
I didn't finish.
You did what?
I didn't finish the question.
Ah, sorry. Tell me.
You are simplifying by one way of navigating, of interpreting this score,
Mm-hmm.
when in this complexity interpretation could be other, no? Even
Absolutely.
movements.
Yeah, that's totally personalized tablature, let's say.
Okay, so in your group, when after this data processing, this etymological part, as you say, when you come back to play, you are taking this data analysis, which is personal actually. It's your
It is
approach,
personal, but
your
on the other, hand, there are not infinite ways of playing it. For example, if you have a note, the middle C on the piano, and then you have another note in the end of the piano, there are not many ways you can play that. There's no interpretation there, because your upper arm has to move, has to do that movement. So what I'm
but you are coming back to a complex score.
Yes, then you will go back. But this sort of basic ground has some universals, in the sense that everybody will need to do the upper movement. There is no pianist that would do and keep the,
You are coming back to lemma icon epigram.
Of course.
Very precise
Of course.
notation which is
That-
linked with the composition.
Yes,
idea.
yes.
If you're playing a string instrument, for instance, on the violin, or if you're playing guitar with 6 strings, then you have much more variability. So in this case,
No, I mean that for interpretation could be, of course.
This is-
I mean, it's the system of a kind of universal, which of course in the movement is great, but then there is a particular score. So the thing is, the system is applicable for very.
I'll show the application. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I would like a more profound analysis of that. So how it could change your insight of a piece.
You could have.
There is other.
You could definitely
Ah,
map.
have it.
You can map
Of course
any
that you do.
sort of notation like that. You can correlate any sort of notation. I don't know what the interest of it would be with
That's the
Morton
question.
Feldman, for example. Here, I haven't finished though, because this is only the first step. Then you create these systems whereby
So could you
you make applications, concrete applications. And here is an example.
Yeah.
So that's an example whereby I have created the score following system. This is again from Mists. So basically the system at this point, I have synchronized the cursor, and I'm registering my accelerations, and I'm following the cursor. So now I'm following the system, okay? And the system sort of registers what I'm doing. Now it is the system that will be following me, and I will be changing my original performance. So the trick here, just to respond to Fernando's initial question, what's the use of that? The thing is that what the system follows now are exactly these chunks. It doesn't follow node by node like in Antescofo by Archia Kont, for example. It follows only the chunks I have defined as a user. And that's great because in Antescofo you need to input the whole score in symbolic form.
Yeah, and the scope is not things to have all these
Of course.
apparatuses in your hand, so it's
Yeah, but that's the differ. But no, but here it's not all the apparatuses. It's just two very small modules, and there is no comparison to Antescofo, I have to say, because of course Antescofo is a huge project, hugely successful. But
it's not, the thing is that the scope is not analyzing movement, so you can.
of course, it's symbolic score. I know. It's audio following through a symbolic score.
Essential difference. That is.
Yeah, that's why I'm showing that. That's why I'm.
25 minutes. I'm actually very interested in
Yeah.
hearing what Pavlos has to say before I leave.
Okay, so here we have a different performance again, where the system follows me. Now I'm playing much softer and much faster. It works quite good. And here I play with a different articulation, so basically a different movement even. And I make mistakes intentionally, but still the system can follow. Why? Because these chunks, this basic syntax remains the same. That's one example. There is a more extreme, and here is I describe a bit how the system and the connectors between the in-score and the motion follower work. But there is another, actually, example which might be a bit more interesting for you. I have to find it fast. I think it's that one here. Yeah. Okay, so here I'm going back to the Fernihoe, and I'm having the system follow not only here in the first example of the following, it followed really normal variations of the performance. Here it will follow distortions, it will follow completely different ways of articulating the material. That's the representation I showed before. Here I'm teaching the system. Okay. It didn't work. Here it's an instance of the system not working. So the system didn't follow very, very well what I was doing. I don't know why. Probably I did it much different than in the beginning. But you can hear I'm not playing the piece itself, lemma, icon, epigram. I'm just playing the chords that correspond to the different positions, that correspond to this ground score eventually. So, didn't work. We go further. The following is shown here. The green signal is the new gesture I'm doing. The gray signal is the gesture I have recorded before. Now I'm playing the piece. So you see, I gave the basic pattern and the system followed when I played the real thing. that's quite interesting, because it's not the way we generally think about motion following, about score following. So, because we think about following either the sound or the notes, but here it really follows my chunks, my underlining gesture, this reductive gesture, not the phenomenal gesture. Another instance. Again, it didn't start because I didn't do the preparation. I played much slower, very differently. I'm sticking a bit. I'm doing these repetitions. It waits for me, you see? The system waits. I keep playing. It stands there because it doesn't have the displacement to go further. And the last one, I will completely distort it. Very slow in the beginning. And now it didn't follow these alien things. It waited until I went. So that's why we did this chunking, you see? Because then you can really go into some sort of very interesting applications. And this is, so to speak, the trip back to ontology somehow. It's the trip back to going from something we know, so we get to know the basic structure of the movement, and then we go back to an application to do, again, interactive music and create something new with that. That's the thing. Okay, maybe I should finish with some of this project at Paris 8 with Jean-François Jego, Aurélien Duval. So we tried to create what we said, we described as different symbolic and virtual spaces. The idea was to communicate to the audience aspects of the performance that normally remain hidden, that normally the audience, and there comes the question of the listener as well, how the listener can know more. And so we combined motion, because I'm using motion capture. The motion capture controls the visuals, the visual staging, and all that is correlated to the symbolic spaces, to the notation. And for this occasion, we even used the original sketches of Xenakis, which we took from the archive, to create the sort of symbolic spaces. So here you see it's me with the motion capture system. I'm wearing a full body, 32 sensors all over, and that creates a virtual avatar of mine here. And there are several qualities of movement accelerated, not only visualized, not only acceleration, but also speed and jerk, the second degree of acceleration, the acceleration of acceleration, so to speak. And you have what we call egocentric and allocentric views of this data, so the audience can perceive what I perceive in the left hand, or the audience can perceive me as in concert. And then all that was integrated with some sort of environmental projections, on the ceiling, on the audience. That was a very, very difficult performance. It took place in the pandemic, in a very small window. We had to make concerts in March 21 eventually, and we had a small audience from students from the university, and it was very, very hard to organize logistically, because you can imagine that this is not easy to do, and we did it in very, very short time. So it was really a miracle it happened. There is interactive staging, so there is controls for the audience to come and participate and play with the effects in real time. And as for the performance, I can show you a bit. You can find all that on YouTube. Where is my cursor? Okay, just so generally speaking, there are those elements of the caustic effects, the water-like effects in the ceiling and all in front of the audience, which create this augmented environment. And then there are the sketches of Xenakis superimposed with the avatar of my movement. And the intensity and all that changes according to what I'm doing with my hands. So it becomes really palpable for the audience in terms of energy. Here, just to show you a bit the nuts and bolts. Here you see the avatar in real time. You can see that the system itself is not so invasive eventually, because my hands are free, so unfortunately we don't track the fingers, but we have the wrists, so we have all the displacement sort of energy. And concerning the physical spaces, this is how it looks. So that's a perception from inside the software for the virtual reality, Unity. Those are the symbolic spaces of Xenakis. Maybe that's the first sketch, the very first situation in the piece. And then that's the second sketch, and we change color. So the audience sees the sketch, perceives the change in ambience, in color, in everything, and also in movement, because of the movement qualities. Okay, and we've done that for the whole piece, and this is just to see the interface indeed, and how you can, if we had a system, a real virtual reality, then the audience would be able to go around the performance and the performer, to be really in the virtual space and go interact with the sketches, etc. We haven't done that, but that's part of the idea. Okay, and now what we do at this point in time for a concert in Paris, 24th of November, if anyone could be there, is totally different, because we have all 4 pieces by Xenakis. Each piece is associated with a different capture technology and with very different results visually, and we also have a ritual about me being dressed and undressed with the technologies. So it's a very, very interesting sort of theatrical thing as well, taking place between the pieces. And it's the complete Xenakis piano works. That's what? Oh no, that's the same. Okay. To finish, about forms of epistemic violence. First of all, we're talking about technology-enhanced learning, but then we're using these very, very charged words like optimization of learning. What is, in music, optimization of learning? There is lots of research that shows, for example, that music makes sense for people and attracts people to continue working on it when music is harder than what they can get. So why optimize learning? Why take that away from the user? Why offer them with, will that keep their interest for doing what's called an autotelic activity like music. Another issue is the reciprocal relation between music and human-computer interaction. And music, there is lots of history about how our interfaces in our everyday life, like the mouse and the windows, were developed by musicians, basically. People were experimenting on the work of musicians. And so it's very good to see how these interfaces feed back to music and in what ways, because there was indeed violence involved in this relation. So the musicians were exploited just because they were musicians to create interface, just because they were socially, so to speak, in a lower status, and no other professional would do things like that. So that's quite interesting. One has to think about the origins of body appropriation. I'm showing here just indicatively these devices, early devices about learning the piano. That was a French one, Archidactyle, by Georges Rétif, and there were many similar things, you know, the Schumann, the accident Schumann had when he tried to become a virtuoso by making his fingers independent. Those are very characteristic and symbolic of this implicit violence in our education as performers. And of course, this sort of violence, which could be associated with Foucault and his notion of biopower, is today transcribed into the no power, the transcription of my movements into data, and then the use of that data. How is this data, as you said, those were the ethical questions you were referring to, how is this data going to be used? Yes, yes.
Why no?
No is from the mind. It's from the Greek. It's a term actually. No power. It's the sort of follow up to biopower, whereby it's not only the biological processes that become grasped by forms of authority, but it's also now our very minds, in the sense that, for example, we can be producing data, and this data be used by other people, by corporations, without our consent. So these are huge issues which I cannot tackle here, but I'm just giving you a taste of the sort of thing I'm working right now. I'm writing a book actually on the biopolitics of human and machine learning, and this is the domain that I'm touching, talking about cognitive and surveillance capitalism, for example, and eventually providing some ecological visions. How can we use this data in order to decentralize, in order to make our practices viable ecologically and ethically? So I think that that's a very global view. I have omitted many things in between, but this would have no end if I would have put everything. As a conclusion concerning our ways of accessing knowledge, I think it's quite clear from what I've shown that indeed data, multimodal data, body rendition into data is one way to, above all, communicate elements of our practice, both to listeners, performers, composers, researchers, to deal with those data as scientific entities, to create theories, to try to correlate with insights. So data in themselves are, I would say, an interface, almost. Interface between different domains to be used again back into artistic practice. So empirical data are indeed important, but they cannot substitute the sort of immediate experience, the getting wet part, at least when we're and again, even if we are speaking about the listener, I don't think a listener could afford not going to a concert hall and just dealing with sort of virtual concert halls, which is also a huge debate after the pandemic. And at the same time, the sort of involvement needed in order to recite our definitions for the water, to create our own representations and mental models apart from the interaction. So I would say those three elements are all sort necessary. We cannot dispose of anything in this process. Okay, that's.
It's fantastic. Pavlos, do you have any questions?
I have one question. I'm thinking whether you have, on your end, seen anybody engaging with this type of approach when it comes to performance where you're navigating, for example, within sonic holograms, for example. Because this, you are situated at your instrument. I'm thinking more about when you start making things more complex or adding to the sort of the compositional structure, expanding it beyond notation and so on. Whether anything comes to mind.
What's the sort of response to that, or
Like
by listeners?
No, whether you have seen any practitioner on your end, because you're.
This is not open. This is not open source, so to speak.
No.
This is not something we provide yet.
No, I don't mean in that. But if you have noticed any of your colleagues. I mean,
Other types of.
Yeah, that have been engaging in that type of analysis. This is just if something comes quickly to mind.
There are many. Yeah, there is lots. So you're asking about related work.
Yeah.
There is lots of things. One thing that comes to mind and was very interesting was this American Chinese researcher at MIT, Xiao, and she created a mirror fugue, as she called it. So it was an audio-video installation whereby you would have an actual video projection of a virtual pianist playing on a disc clavier. And that was really uncanny because it creates physical presence out of very simple technologies, basically. But she did it in such a convincing way, or you could play four hands with your deceased teacher, you know. So yeah, that's an example of how techniques like that, but that's very different. Talking about artistic practices with data, that's a huge domain, which is, you know, curated by many different communities, artistic.
I'm thinking more about like working with, for example, a pre-existing piece. I'm not talking about using the data to generate a new piece, but working with a pre-existing. Anyway, I can also just perhaps send an email. I don't know, but it's coming from analyzing.
So you're talking mostly about analysis of music.
Using this technology for analysis.
Those technologies are as standalones. For example, InScore has been used by a huge community of users, and it's very intuitive. The learning curve is not too steep, so you can learn it quite fast to code a bit the elements, the graphic elements. So you can use it for creating interactive scores, for example, for a Mozart piece or whatever.
It was more about, because I should have said I've already performed within a sonic hologram.
Okay.
And there are some elements that. So I was thinking about whether this should be applied, and I will not have the time to do it before I finish my PhD.
Okay.
But I've done other types of analysis, but I was thinking of.
Maybe we can discuss about that. If you want to show me what you have in mind, I could have some suggestions about if those could. But generally speaking, all that is very modular. It's very adaptable to other projects and situations. So.
I think very interesting for your fingers, what you do with the left hand, in terms of capturing.
Actually, I have to say those technologies were first the accelerations part, the accelerometers I'm using. I don't think I showed them because we dealt only with the chunky sensors, but okay. that's the basic sensor I started using, the green one I'm showing here, right? And that was back in 2014. Now we have, those are commercialized. Those were custom made at IRCAM and by Emmanuel Fleti, and now they are commercialized. They're called Riot Vitalino, and you can buy them for you know, not too much. It's very affordable. And those modules I put on my wrists. So that's all I need to play. With wristbands, I put them underneath and I do it. But these modules were initially used by Marie Kimura, who you might know, a great pioneer violinist, who did the first experiments by placing that on the bow of the violin. And that was the first collaboration also of my team at IRCAM, Frédéric Bevilacqua, with performers. So I came from there somehow. I came from violin, so maybe we should speak about that.
It would be interesting also because there are elements when you come into such a dynamic sonic environment as hologram. It's also have moments in the navigation from listening, and that becomes a large part of your gestural performance and so on. So, yeah.
Absolutely, but all that, it's a question of you know, being able to take the time and develop your own system eventually. So composing interactions are, as Fernando said, and it's not trivial. It takes lots of. It's really about composing one's instrument in a certain way, and there is no easy answer to that. But it's a hugely creative endeavor. But yeah. One needs to find their own ways there.
Can I ask one more question, or Fernando, do you want to
No.
first? No?
No,
A final thought, because where you ended in terms of the ethical issues.
Mm-hmm.
And I look forward to reading your book, of course. Of course, there's this whole topic of discussion, what kind of social domain are we creating through these type of performances, and also in terms of telematic performances and so on. Luckily there is a lot of, in terms of embodiment, a lot of discussion occurring at the moment within education about the policing of bodies. So perhaps a very open question, what are your formulations about, for example, you're bringing, yes, a repertoire that is already sort of part of the canon, you could say. What are your thoughts, if any, on this notion of perfection in relation to the sort of the
perfection as
Yeah.
the perfection of the high modernist performance practice model, so that every note should be in the right place and every this sort of virtuoso, hyper virtuoso.
Yeah, so I'm just curious about your thoughts.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. That's exactly what I'm trying to work against, because the way I'm approaching here these transformations of notation, for example, and these multiple entry points to notation imply also a multitude of performances. So there is no single performance that I would consider viable, or the best performance, or the best performer. So yeah, if there is a takeaway of all that, and the ecological vision, if you like, is that we navigate a certain work. Of course, if there is a composer will always have the authority to impose certain pathways and certain desires, and that's absolutely fine. But I think what we are getting to know from what earlier was considered as masterpieces of the 20th century, or after 1950 music, is that, you know, all this music actually never sounds the same between different performers. Like, there is actually a series of conferences in Paris, Paris 8, organized by Maki Solomos, which is called Interpréter, Performer, Xenakis. And there, exactly, it's unbelievable how we always come to the same conclusion, that There is not a single performance that could claim validity over others, you know, that this is the real Xenakis. The way some people like to say that this is the real Bach or this is the real Mozart. No, I think that's unacceptable in our quest for and that's where I prefer the word interaction than interpretation. We interact with musical works. We don't interpret them. We don't just understand and, you know, try to do something different. We interact, and each element of this interaction feeds in the result. And the result is also provisional because we'll play it again. And I try to play always differently. I never reproduce my performances, even if I play worse, you know, even if that means that I will not be satisfied in the end. I'm very interested in exploring new ways to do things. That answers the question?
Yeah, and I mean, of course, it's obvious by
Yeah.
through
But it's, yeah, of course,
I was
of course.
just like, if there was of course, by doing this, your entire research actually establishes, you know, the
Yeah.
foundation
It's
so-
about deconstructing,
Yeah.
transforming the
Yeah.
score. So,
Yeah.
and you see, not all people are also comfortable with that. Many composers have felt. I've received criticism about that. Many composers have felt, but even Fernando implied it before that. Okay, you do this sort of chunking, but then you need to play the real thing. There is a score that you are going to play the final score of Fernehope.
I didn't apply that in any case.
No, but you were right there that it's not. I'm not playing from the score I created. I always play from the original score, but it's how.
I was referring to the loop that you say between the etymological part and the ontological, coming back.
Okay.
You are coming back to that, and of course.
Ah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. But it's true that I cannot, you know. The point of reference is always the authentic score.
Which allows a lot of lectures, no? Depending.
Yeah.
And that is a good thing because
Yeah.
even when you don't have the whole information, and there is a lot of things that exist on interpretation, I don't think I cannot speak about all composers, but by my experience. And the thing that I like is just having, and sometimes for the same performer, different ways of enlightening, even things that I didn't saw when I was for respect. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
as you say, there is no a same version never of a piece.
Yeah.
And that's even with works on which notation will be more rigid, if you want.
Yeah. For me, it's obvious for old music as well. For ancient
Of course.
music, early music, it's.
You know, I was early music player, so I'm not just talking on air. I know that there is a creative part on which, but my question regarding that wasn't a criticism about that. It was that is a personal. Of course, it's movements. So you don't have a lot of margin. You don't want to do a turn on the piano and come back to. Of course, there is basic. But, this analysis or this tool of analyzing movements. The question that I wanted to do at the moment that we just were interrupted is if in which way you think that it changed your performance of a piece that you were previously
You have already played.
a lot of time.
That's a
So
very
if
good question.
You can really measure, as of course that it will change. Of course, every experience will change. And this one is a very particular one.
Mm.
Do you feel more light? I mean, having all this data in your mind, do you think that you're coming back to this score? You were more, because I have this sensation. I don't know if it's true that
Mm.
maybe
Mm.
that gives you a kind of that it can make your shoulders lighter. You know, if you after all this path.
Mm.
You know that you was
Yeah, there is no easy answer to that because sometimes it's complicating things. Sometimes I'm taking more time to, you know, because exactly it makes it. Yeah, it can make it easier, lighter because now you know. Oh, okay, it's Brian Ferneyhough. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ah, it's this little position. Okay, and then I can, but then, you go back, you go deep to its position, for example, and you start sculpting as if you were a sculptor with, and that part becomes rather complicated because then you realize that to do only the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is nothing.
yeah.
So it becomes superficial. You see what I mean? And then you have to go back and struggle again and put. So efficiency is one thing, but the sort of relation you're forging with a piece over time is a very personal one, and it's one obviously also of not removing blocks but putting blocks, putting more effort sometimes on things, trying to just it's
I mean, the thing is, sorry.
yeah, that's it. No, I don't have a definite
The
answer.
thing
A
is that
definitive
you
answer.
were- at the end, you are coming back to mental representation,
Mhm.
or you are representing.
When I was younger, I was playing everything by heart. I've played by heart the opera piece by Brian Ferneyhough, Opus Contra Naturam. I've played a good chunk of, in Darmstadt 2010. I've played a great chunk of Xenakis by heart. So what happens very often is that if you work on a piece time and again, you memorize it.
If you have a kind of analog decoupling of movements with other piece, with a piece which is nothing. I mean,
Mhm.
if you
Mhm.
analyzing the gestures, very different piece of music,
Mhm. Mhm.
and in a way you can have some path that also fits into. So you have the same representation for a thing which is completely different.
Completely different. Yes.
So
Yes. Because at the
performance-
level of gesture, it might be the same.
Yeah.
Eh?
Of course, but because you are taking one part in the experience, in the body experience,
Of
it's
course.
so much more complicated than the movements that of course you are.
Absolutely. It's a reductive. It's a reductive process there,
Yeah.
but you're planning to go back to the
That's
beginning.
the thing, it is because in
This
terms-
going back process is the.
It's very clear to me in terms of research, but I am not a performer, so I don't know in terms of your body as a performance if you are already seeing results of the research and you're coming
Okay.
back to the performance. to
Okay,
the-
so
the
your
body.
question is rather if that can work when you've learned the piece. What's the point of doing that? Because you've learned the piece before, or
Now, because of you have learned the piece before
yeah.
and you have just all this memory, all this experience of doing it before,
Mm-hmm.
then you are doing all this path, which in terms of research is very clear,
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
benefits or
Mm-hmm.
doing. But my question is very simple. It was helpful for your body. Do you think that it was helpful for
Yes.
your body performance?
Yes. In that sense, yes, because it makes my perception of my body and of my movements much clearer, and everything is demystified. You don't have this sort of.
Yeah, that's what
You
I
know.
wish. Not the point of.
So that is easier. But then, again, if I want to make, to find different approaches to playing something, different pathways, I might need to change the movements as well. So I might need to change the choreography. So all that will go to the waste bin, and I will need to make a new.
Yeah, but and also the software to change. On top.
Everything, yeah, of course.
The
That's
technology said it will.
okay. Yeah,
The thing
absolutely.
which is remaining, or it could remain longer time is, of course, ways of doing on that.
It's the
on
concept.
this loop.
Yeah,
Concept, yes,
exactly.
correct.
Yeah, I agree.
The coming back from is because that I said it looks like Schenkerian analysis. Because look, I already said it because the path of Schenkerian analysis could be very useful on a particular moment for particular people.
Yeah,
And then a step to further.
absolutely, absolutely.
I guess my point with all of this stuff, with the epistemology and these questions that we're asking, is not necessarily that it's useful. That there may not be a benefit to all of this stuff. It might be completely a fail.
Mhm.
But there's something in the asking. There's something in the doing.
Absolutely.
Of this.
Absolutely.
And yeah, he might have to recalibrate, redo things completely for a different approach. But does that produce a better art? Not necessarily, but it's something to do, right?
I don't know what a better art would be in the first place. I
Exactly,
mean, it's
Well,
a
some
huge.
people are writing about that, which is kind of surprising.
Yeah.
You know.
And which
Yeah.
other pieces did you analyze with this procedure? With other repertoire?
I have recorded over the course of the years, like since 2006, 14, basically. It's a multitude of classical repertoire also. So we have recorded Bach, Bach, Beethoven, some Mozart, some romantic music.
From contemporary music?
From
Xenakis,
contemporary
Xenakis.
music, it's Xenakis, Fernichu. No, basically everything I do goes through this process, so it's huge amount of repertoire. I haven't. It's all my repertoire since 2014.
You
It's
have filmed all past
no. But I'm collecting data from my learning process very often.
When you are not using the software, how you are collecting data?
No, I mean the two modules,
With
the
the
Bitalino,
module,
yeah, that
that's
I
all.
use like on a daily basis. Then what I do with the data is a different issue. I can just use them to see, okay, on day one I did that, and then I did something different, and I can compare to
Okay, but
how.
you have it also, you have in your place you would sometimes.
It's very. This is very easy to set up. It's very portable. It's not all the features. I don't have the
No,
touch
no.
keys. I don't have the. You see, but some things are very easy.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Pavlos.
Thank you.